Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is a smoky Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. I'm Jer Stays, and joining me as well is
Norris Howard. Don't have adenoids, also suffering from deep smoke inhalation with this Canada thing.
Yeah, man. I feel like I've smoked 1,000 cigarettes today.
Yeah, it's bad.
Metro Detroit has the second worst air quality in the world right now due to a series of wildfires in Quebec. We are going to get into that in a bit with Dr. Paul Thomas, who's going to break it all down what's going on. Because, I don't think people really realized. I mean, we saw some wildfire smoke in the past from Alberta and other places, and it changed colors of things. But this is, I think, a new level to a lot of people. And even if you look at the data, it's a higher level to people.
Anecdotally, like I said, last night, my partner and I, we went downtown to an event at the Standby, which was all about dry. It was a dry event. It was all about alcohol-less spirits. It was really interesting. As we were approaching downtown, you could see the haze over the city, and it just looked like, the industrial era. Like, it really just looked really bad. So it's been tough.
I will take this opportunity to remind people that we ourselves will have a happy hour with both alcoholic and non-alcoholic options on Wednesday, June 21st from 5 to 8 p.m. because I can never forget to segue in a promotion. But we got a lot of other stories to talk about too. We're going to talk about this new hands-free driving law in Michigan that comes with some pretty stiff fines. There have been water breaks all around Metro Detroit, as well as the number that came out with some reporting from Crain's Detroit Business. Pretty stunning, 50% physical office space vacancy in downtown Detroit. We'll switch it up. Why don't we start with this new hands-free driving law, Norris? It's quite a thing. It comes with some pretty stiff penalties, as I mentioned. What they're going to do is say that at your first violation with a regular motor vehicle, $100 or 16 hours of community service or both. Second violations, $250 fines, 24 hours of community service. And if there are 3 violations, you'd have to do a driver improvement course. This has been taking a hold in a number of states. I think 26 now that have these kinds of rules.
Yeah, and I think this is perfectly fair. I think it's perfectly fair. I think the fines are not exorbitant. Obviously, a $250 fine sucks, but that's not, prohibitive, especially if you can't afford that, then you have the community service option. But I think this is fantastic. I think the thing for me is I wish, at least in the parts of the bills that I read, I didn't necessarily see any special considerations made for those who are like DoorDash or Uber drivers. But they're trying to say enough cars are hands-free and have hands-free technology that you should be able to do it. I think that's a bit of a blind spot for this bill. So I think that's a consideration to be made. But generally, I think this is a fantastic idea because I have literally seen people make TikToks while driving or watch actual feature films while driving. And it is the most dangerous thing conceivable in a region of the U.S. where people have to drive.
Well, and they call out specifically that you cannot view, record, or transmit a video. You can't access, read, or post to a social networking site, as well as telephone calls, text messages, that kind of thing. The hands-free part is very crucial. There's also a cutout for using GPS. So like if it's mounted on your dashboard as a GPS, it's also a primary offense, which means they can go ahead and pull you over just for this. And I think when this comes into effect, June 30th being signed today, there's going to be like an initial wave and getting used to because, man, I've seen so many people do different things in their cars. And I'm like, how are you making this happen in driving?
I think it's just one of those things where, yeah, we could talk about attention spans. We can talk about this. We can talk about that. But I mean, let's be honest, for as long as cell phones have been around, people have used their phones while driving. I remember even back in the day when the first sort of like headsets, like the wired headsets for your cell phones were coming out, and there was a discussion on if that would be a distraction to driving. Like, should you have a headset on? Will you hear other things happening while you're driving? Same thing for Bluetooth headsets. I remember when that was an argument, but I like that this is done now, specifically because of the advent of TikTok. And I'm not trying to be a TikTok hater, but the very nature of the platform is so quick and easily digestible that it's so easy to find yourself just glued to TikTok. And like I said, I've seen people driving around looking at TikTok, and it's incredibly frustrating because it's so dangerous. And I think especially now, as we have more and more teens who are 100% on TikTok, don't really mess with any other social platforms. This is going to be important for them to know that you can't do that while you're driving. I think we all can be a little bit better on using our phones while we drive. And I think I don't see too much bad coming from this.
It's a lot different than when I was younger. And I remember I dated someone for a while who would T9 text while driving.
Oh, no. That is crazy. And first of all, the somebody who was good enough to T9 text without looking at the phone. Now, for those listeners who may not know what T9 texting
Oh, that's
is,
right. That's right. Oh my gosh.
when you used to have old touchpad, not touchpads, but the actual physical buttons on your phone, you had to hit like the button 3 times to get to the letter C. Like you had to hit the 2 pad or the 2 button 3 times to use letter C. So somebody who can do that without looking is a special person.
Let's talk about a number that I believe in my bones, but it's still kind of crazy to hear it spoken out loud from a leader of Bedrock, that there is a 50% physical office vacancy rate in downtown Detroit. Now, that isn't the leases. That's just physical space. This was reported by Crane's Detroit Business out of the Mackinac Policy Conference. Good piece. I'll link to it in the show notes about this idea of converting residential to office space. This is something we've touched on a little bit on the show, but as we get more and more months in, there was this idea that more and more people would come back to work, and some have come to work back in person in these kind of office jobs.
There was a conversation nationally around this, and all the big wigs and the billionaires wanted go back to work, go back to work, go back to work, go back to the office. And, those in the know basically said, listen, commercial real estate is potentially going to implode because of this. The nature of work in the Western world has changed fundamentally. There is no need for people to go to the office. And here's the thing. I'm a very in-person person. I love being physically with people, but I also acknowledge that I don't need to be in the office with my coworkers 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Half the time we're just sitting around at the water cooler talking about whatever popular TV show or sports game just came on. And really, we only got done about 2 hours of work. And the thing for me is that for a city like Detroit, which could hugely benefit from an injection of density anywhere in the city, whether it be downtown, midtown, Corktown, it doesn't matter. Density is the thing that the city of Detroit needs in any neighborhood. And currently right now, downtown is a little bit ahead of most parts of the city, but it can be even better. There have been times where I have been downtown in the city of Detroit in the middle of the week, and nobody's outside. At 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night, there's no one outside. You would never see that in another major city. And I just think that that's very interesting. And with the amount of attractions, restaurants, shopping that they want to put down there, it's going to need people to live down there. I think this is a wake-up call for a lot of these building owners that, yeah, maybe they need to convert a lot of these to residential, because for me, I don't potentially see it as a bad thing. I don't see these numbers as like some death knell for white collar work. No, I just think the nature of work has to change, and the nature of how we plan our communities have to change, and the way that we have to plan our downtowns have to change. And I think one of the best things about this is it gives a city like Detroit a very, very unique opportunity to provide more people than most other cities with the opportunity to have sort of that downtown walkable lifestyle that a lot of people my age crave. I think this is a great opportunity. I refuse to look at it as a pure negative.
Before we get to Dr. Paul Thomas, today is the 18th consecutive day without rain, and that means there is a nearly 17% increase in water usage. Not only it's in the city of Detroit, that's where it's been measured, but across the region, there are issues with water main breaks because more people are watering lawns, and the infrastructure is kind of buckling a little bit. I think it's interesting in reflection of that conversation that I had with Macomb County Public Works Candace Miller, and another that's going to be airing later, I think next week, where I actually talked to Detroit Water and Sewage Department head Gary Brown about what the programs that they're doing. But this heat is putting our infrastructure under more stress. And I can't help but think there's been some editorials over the years about, is Michigan a climate haven? And I feel like, it's a place where people want to go because it's more insulated from climate dangers. I feel like we've got some work to go if we want to get close to claiming that title.
Yeah, the infrastructure's got to be improved, period. Obviously, the lakes insulate us from a lot of things, but the infrastructure is just not there. I don't want to say that a lot of people anticipate reading. It's one of those weird things where you hear like water main breaks, like, you hear about that kind of more so, in the wintertime when there's these crazy weather events that are happening. But you got not just, and let's be honest here, you don't just have the heat and the lack of rain. Now this haze is over the top of the city now as well, which is continuing to make life just very uncomfortable. And so water usage is a lot higher. We are supposed to have some rain next week a little bit, but not enough to really make a reasonable impact. And, this huge weather event, I think, is affecting the usual precipitation that we would get around this time of year. But either way, climate change, y'all, it's a real thing.
And the city is asking residents to cut back on water usage for a while here. So something to think about as we get into our conversation with Dr. Paul Thomas. Joining me virtually, old friend of the show, Dr. Paul Thomas, Plum Direct Primary Care. Welcome back. It's so good to talk to you.
Jared, it's fabulous to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Too bad it's so often when we're dealing with some kind of issue, but it's health. It's things we got to talk about, right?
Yeah, oftentimes people call the doctor when things don't go right, so I'm happy to serve whenever folks need me.
Yeah, and I wanted to get into this with you because of the health and physiological effects of what's going on. As we talked about at the top of the show, the air quality index in Metro Detroit is not good. Depending on when you look at it, it's 2, 5, 10th worst air quality in the world due to these 150 or so wildfires in Quebec. Canada is experiencing more wildfires, and they're on track now to experience more than they did in the past. And I think, for me, when I saw some listener feedback and some questions before I reached out to you, I think the biggest thing is that people aren't used to having to look at the air quality index, and they're feeling a certain kind of way physiologically that they didn't really realize could be a thing here in Detroit. And because, climate change and everything else, this is something that we're dealing with now. And I think we're going to deal with in various steps, throughout the summer. So Doc, what do we need to be worried about?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into this. I think in a broad brushstroke, climate health, where we start thinking about the physiological effects of climate change is going to be a big part of medicine going forward. And poor air quality is just one of those effects. I feel pretty lucky to live in Michigan and the Midwest, where we're surrounded by forests and lakes that act as somewhat of a filter and a buffer to a lot of pollutants in our environment, whereas somebody who lives in California or British Columbia might be growing up with more and more wildfires, especially over the last couple of decades. But now we are experiencing the brunt of this. And you're right, we are going to have to check our air quality. And it might be like a COVID situation where you might have to mask up on severe air quality days, like today, where our air quality is somewhere in the range of 160, 170 on the air quality index. And so the issue with the smoke, this haze that's around us, is that there are fine particles that we're breathing in that are getting into our nose, mouth, lungs, and even crossing into our bloodstream and getting into our brains that are causing inflammation and poor health outcomes.
Wow, that's something. And the first thing I hear, like, mask, is that something that could be useful in a situation like this?
Yeah, so because what the forest fires are putting out are particulate matters, and let me get into some of the nitty gritty. You're looking at sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide that's going into the environment. And when you're breathing that in, that can cross into your central nervous system, get into your brain essentially, and it can cause oxidative stress where it's going to worsen chronic conditions, especially if you're immunocompromised. It's also going to inflame your lung tissue and cause worsening of asthma and COPD. And, we've seen epidemiologically, people have more heart attacks on these higher pollutant days or these poor air quality index days. So to prevent that from happening, there are a few things you can do. You want to potentially spend more time indoors, wear a mask, use a HEPA filter at your house, and avoid things like vacuuming unless your vacuum has a HEPA filter, and limiting your time outdoors exposed to these harsh chemicals.
You mentioned asthma, COPD. Those kind of things make sense. What are some other groups that might feel effects or at some risk around dealing with some of this stuff?
Yeah, if you're a long-term smoker and you've developed chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, you're especially at risk. And a lot of people have COPD exacerbations where they have a lot of difficulty breathing and they're going to the hospital because their COPD is getting worse. They feel like they can't breathe. And unfortunately, the vulnerable folks in our communities are kids under the age of 5. So kids under the age of 5 tend to have narrower air tubes in their lungs or bronchioles, and those get inflamed and irritated, and they can swell up on days like today, and it can lead to a lot of pediatric hospitalizations for asthma exacerbations, or kids who may not even have baseline asthma, just have difficulty breathing because of these toxins that are in the air that they're breathing when they're out at the playground or out at the tot lot.
Well, I know that we have a lot of listener dads and moms out there, kids out there doing soccer, baseball. You're mentioning kids kind of under 5 and such. Well, what about debating whether or not they should be practicing on days like this? Is this something where they should be concerned or think about it?
It's certainly a topic of conversation. I mean, it really is difficult that we're at this point in our society where, we have these environmental concerns that are difficult to deal with. But it could be that, we do cancel soccer practice because we know that when you exert yourself more, when you're breathing more deeply, when your heart's beating faster, and you're breathing in these chemicals, they can have a worsening effect. And we know this because we've studied firefighters who are exerting themselves and, really challenged in these situations where they have to go into a burning building. And the more they exert themselves, the higher the concentration of the smoke, the worse their health outcomes. So, unfortunately, we may have to consider postponing a practice or a game because of these poor air quality events.
Now, what about the more healthy person? Somebody who, runs every day, does different things. What kind of concern level should they have?
Obviously, if you're dedicated to being an active, healthy lifestyle, maybe you do a treadmill day inside on poor air quality days like this, and postpone your outdoor workout to another day, or you do a day of weight training at the gym or in your basement or at your home or something where you have some layer of defense against what's in the air, and that might be a good way to lessen the effect of this poor air quality.
So can you kind of demystify these numbers a little bit with the air quality index? I'm looking at my phone here, and like the stock weather app talks about the AQI and gives you a number and a heat map. Can you kind of talk about like the 100, the 150, the 2, like what does that kind of mean?
Yeah, so if you're in the 0 to 50 range, that's good air quality. Those are most days in Michigan. We're accustomed to having really good air quality days. If it gets into the 51 to 100 range, that's a moderate day. Maybe a concern if you have severe asthma or a severe chronic immunocompromised issue. And the orange range is 101 to 150. And that's really unhealthy for sensitive groups. Those are days where if you have asthma, you have COPD, you're at risk for a heart attack or a stroke, you'd want to be out of the elements. You'd want to be inside in a air-controlled arrangement with a HEPA filter, with the windows closed, air conditioning on, set to circulation mode. And then for days like today, unfortunately, over 150, it's really unhealthy for everyone involved. And so, these are days that we advise people to largely stay indoors to avoid inhaling these chemicals.
Well, and over at Plum Health Direct Primary Care, have you been getting some questions and things around this beyond kind of what I've been asking?
Yeah, we've gotten some texts from our patients about, have you seen this recommendation and should I do anything differently? And we've given some general recommendations, basically what I'm sharing with your listeners. Some other things, if you burn candles or incense at your house, you're not going to want to do that on days like today. If you use a wood stove or harsh cleaning products, you're not going to want to do that at your house today. And, like I said before, avoid vacuuming because that can really stir up the dust in the air unless your vacuum has a HEPA filter. And then, it's good to check in on our patients with asthma. If they're uncontrolled, they're having more than 2 episodes in a week or waking up twice a night in a month or going to the hospital twice a year, that indicates that their asthma is in poor control. And then we kind of go with a step-up therapy. So, we tend to check in with people who have special concerns on days like today.
Well, Dr. Paul Thomas, Plum Health Direct Primary Care, thank you so much for sharing all this information and helping demystify things. And I feel a lot smarter. I feel a lot better about what's going on, knowing kind of a map forward of what to look forward to and what to prepare for.
Well, thanks so much, Jared, for having me on, and everybody stay safe out there.
A very busy show, Norris Howard. It's good to talk to you.
And thank you for having me.
Of course. If you've got feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Leave a note or leave a voice memo. I do read them. We've gotten a huge influx of them lately. We're going to do actually a feedback show soon. There has been so much with some general themes, but I do appreciate it, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. As always, thanks to our members, patreon.com/dailydetroit, for supporting this thing. So with that, I'm Jer Stays. I appreciate you. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.